So now we're going to start Module 4 of Chapter 6, Perception, and we're going to focus on locomotion and sensory integration. And so let's first talk about the movement of the child, or the locomotion. And what we're going to see here, as you can see, this is a little child who is starting to go ahead and stand up, but needs a little help along the way. And so what we see with motor skills in infancy is you got to have an environment that allows you to have some experience. So all of your motor skills are going to develop the more experience you have doing them. So if you can think of, if you have to exercise and you need to kind of bulk up on your muscles, get them much more defined and able to support yourself, that's what babies are constantly doing. So this little kiddo here is standing up and using those hip flexor muscles to make sure that it's stable enough so that they don't wobble and topple over. They may do some deep knee bends, and you can even, especially with a type this age, probably bump their butt on the floor and back up again. And it's essentially like exercise routines, providing them some more experience and developing those skills that they need to have if they're going to successfully learn how to walk, this is what it's leading up to. So one of the keys in developing these more advanced type of skill sets, motor skills, is through something called rhythmic stereotypes, or stereotypies. And what this is where infants really move in kind of a repetitive way. They may rock, may sway, and they do this right before they're about ready to unleash a new skill that they have. So for this little tyke here, he's probably swaying back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And what that swaying does is it creates instability with the muscles. And so he has to learn how to shift from one to the other and maintain his balance. And he's not ready to let go of his support there. It's what they call creeping. And so he'll be walking pretty soon, but you don't go from crawling to walking automatically. You've got to train up to it. And so you'll see these kind of rhythmic stereotypies right before a child's ready to make a leap into crawling, walking, and other types of activities. And then the other thing that we need to know about locomotion is the role of kind of building one upon another skill sets to ultimately come out into a very complex new behavior or new skill. And so the one I always like to use with dynamic systems approach is kind of the ability to throw. And if you've ever seen a young child try to throw, it is quite an adventure. Because if you think about all the things that are involved with throwing, you have a lot of different type of skills. First, you just got to have grasp, right? You've got to go ahead and grasp a ball, for instance. So that's step one. When you're throwing, you've got to also learn when to let go of the ball. And so what you'll do is you will try to throw. So you'll make this quick one and maybe release here. Sometimes they'll release on down. And so the ball, when you're playing catch with a 2-year-old, can be quite an adventure. Sometimes it may fly behind them because they release it on the upswing. Sometimes it may be spiked right in the ground. And other times it may be coming right at you at 100 miles an hour because they actually got it right. But they need to continually have that feedback from the environment for it really to be effective. And that's that dynamic systems approach where you get more and more sophisticated patterns of motor behavior that are emerging over time. And as you get the grip and when to release better and better, you're going to get more effective throwing. And then they'll discover they need to put their body into the throw. And so you'll see a rocking back and forth and a release. And each time they throw, they're getting a little bit of feedback on this needs to occur earlier, this needs to occur later. And before you know it, you have a much more adult-like kind of motor activity. But that's what the dynamic systems approach is this more and more sophisticated patterns of motor and behavior that begin to emerge. The other thing that we need to talk about, and we've talked about all of the different sensory mechanisms developing, but then they have to start communicating with one another. And that's what the perceptual part of the brain has to do. Take in all that new information, say, where are we going with this? How do we work this together? Now, not surprisingly, The two most used of our senses are vision and hearing. And so those are going to be interrelated pretty early on, because typically we are seeing people, they're having their mouths move, and there's sound coming out. And so we need to be able to know when we hear somebody, there's probably somebody speaking that we could see, even if we can't see them. And so it's this kind of relatedness is what we call cross-modal perception. And cross-modal perception is the ability to recognize through one sense an object that is familiar through another sense. Okay? So, for example, we think of an orange, right? And we know an orange from sight, but we can also probably go ahead and pick up the orange and we can feel its texture, and then we can even smell it, and we don't have to necessarily see it to know that it's an orange, because we can rely on our other senses to come up with that information. And so that's what cross-modal perception usually entails. Now, for you to be able to develop this cross-modal perception and integrate those senses, you can't just simply mature. You have to have normal perceptual experiences. So, for instance, if we lock some child away in a darkened room and they never had any visual input, then their interrelatedness in their vision and all their other senses is going to be delayed, because they didn't have normal perceptual experiences. So that's kind of how we see locomotion change over time and how we integrate all those senses that we talked about earlier. In module number 5, we're going to talk about the role of attention and how things change as we enter into adolescence. So module 5 is next.